All right, sweet deal. All right, so let's just go through an example that I put together of a pull request that I made on my own project, and we're going to go through as a group and just sort of talk about some general things to keep in mind, both as the person who's submitting code to be reviewed by someone else, and also what that person who's reviewing your code is going to be watching out for. And again, this is entirely my own opinion. Everyone's going to be looking out for different things. Everyone's going to have different levels of experience. So they might, be able to find something that other people wouldn't normally find when they're looking at your code. So just because I tell you that I would look for this does not mean that it's good or bad or that there's nothing else wrong. Just full disclaimers here. All right. So with that, we're not going to go to my apartment complex. We are going to go to GitHub. If it lets me. If GitHub doesn't work, then this whole thing is a wash. Oh no. They having another outage. Did you guys have any issues yesterday when GitHub was down for like 15 minutes in the evening?
No, I saw that on Slack.
Yeah, I think it was only for like 10-ish minutes or so. Oh, never mind, maybe 30 minutes. It was right during a meeting that I was having with the practicum group where we were gonna sort of talk about like rebasing and squashing commits to try and like fix your pull request. And then that part of the demo kind of went out the window. And now this part of the demo is also probably going out the window. This isn't even GitHub, this is X. Hmm. All right, I'm a little confused, not gonna lie. And, oh, it's back. All right, I don't know what happened. We're gonna pretend like nothing happened. Sweet deal. Okay, so for the sake of this demo, I have open a application that we were working on a little bit in the first couple weeks of this cohort. And then we've kind of dropped to the wayside to focus on answering other questions instead. But I'm gonna bring it back up. Oh, I'm not screen sharing right now. That would be smart. All right, you guys can see this okay?
Yes.
All right, so this is the application we're going to be looking at today. We've built some functionality in here. I'll just quickly demo what it is supposed to do based on what we've accomplished so far in previous weeks. So we have a page that just has a bunch of different products listed on here. And eventually I would be able to like click on one and add it to my cart. And I could search for a water bottle and it would only show me things that have water bottle in the name or suitcase. We did also, I think, briefly talk about adding a cart feature into this when we were talking about lifting state. But I don't think I merged that into the master branch, so I don't think it's in here yet. But for the purposes of today, I've created two separate branches here so that we don't impact anything on the master branch. And I have a pull request that again, does not impact the cart functionality, but essentially what I've done is I've gone back and pretended like those changes we made in the earlier weeks are brand new, which we already committed them into the master branch, so they're not really, but we're going to say that this branch with changes is where I've added these features where I have my table of products. And then beyond my table, I can also search for a product. Those are the two big features that I have, and we're putting them in this merge request to go into this branch that does not have those changes. So, pretend this is the master branch or your main branch or whatever you use. And we're trying to get all of this code into your main branch. And it is our job as reviewers to go through here and try and figure out, okay, is this code good? What does this person need to do to improve their code? Or, what sort of things should we be aware of when we're opening pull requests? And I'm going to sort of defer to you guys a little bit to figure out, what you think is problematic. So definitely pull this open in your browser and take a look through. I want to start while we're, thinking about looking through this code by just like setting some expectations. So as a reviewer, if I am looking at your code, I might run your code if I'm really curious about how something works, but for the most part, I expect that the code that you send me, you have tested to verify that it works. So this request, I'm, as a reviewer, am probably looking at, does this code follow good conventions? Is there something we could do a little bit more efficiently? Is the code all over the place and needs to be cleaned up? I'm looking at the actual changes that you are saying that you are making and assuming that those changes work and trying to identify, ooh, maybe like there was a gap in your logic somewhere that I think could be problematic that maybe you haven't thought about. And I'm going to try and point that out. Or I see this code and I think could be improved in several ways. But I am not, as a reviewer, going to immediately clone your branch and then run it and make sure that it works. Like that is a very long responsibility in order to like properly test something that you didn't write. It is up to you to make sure your code works before you open it up for review. That should be fairly obvious. And I don't think I've ever had a problem with this with the students sending me like code to review that was incomplete. Just an assumption to be made here. In this case, if I run this anyway, and then I open this in my browser, it looks like everything works. I would expect that I can search for mini and it should only show me my mini suitcases, but that doesn't work. And if I go into my console, I have this error here that's getting logged. So we're handling an error that probably is unexpected. If I search for this, I would expect to see all of my mini suitcases and nothing else. So this is something that should not happen when you like submit your code. You should have either lots of automated tests written in your code to say, yes, in this condition, I know that my code behaves properly. And with those automated tests, if they're all passing, we assume that probably our code works. There might still be bugs somewhere, or maybe we don't have a test for a very specific case that is problematic. But if all my tests are passing, I would expect that to mean, yes, my code is good. In this case, we don't have automated tests. We can write automated tests for React components, and we definitely want to write tests for just like functions that are performed by our application. So we can test that this component like renders to the screen and behaves correctly, but we can also say, ooh, I have like a function in here that does something. I want to test to see, given that I pass some number in here, I always get the right output. So I would write my automated tests to say, if I put in the number 3, I should get back the number 3. And if those are failing, it's problematic. But in this case, we don't have automated tests. And so I need to verify that my code actually works and fix all of the bugs before I go too far. And in this case, I would look and see it's coming from my search bar, line number 11. And we can go in there really quick. And line number 11 is where the log happens. So I would say that probably this check search is not correct. And there is a weird bug in here. This check search is trying to say, like we only want to let someone type up to 100 characters. This should be a minus, like a less than. So if our string is somehow negative length, which should not be possible, then it's not a valid string. And if it's greater than 100 characters, it's too long. Otherwise, it's true. And if I were to run this, I can now search as expected. All right, so my code works. It's ready to submit. My pull request is open and everyone's happy, at least at the get-go. Another thing to be aware of for your pull requests is that your commit history here is what is going to get added into your main branch. And so we want to make sure that our commit history is pretty clean. I had an example the other day with some of the students in my practicum group where they had put together a lot of code that tallied up to like 31 different commits in one pull request. And some of them were adding features, but probably like 80% of them were just addressing feedback left on the pull request. I don't need 31 commits to say that I added some new code. I probably want only a couple of commits that actually add the code and also address the feedback of the PR. So I'll have some initial commits that do some stuff, and then someone will leave a comment and say, oh, I think we should actually do this instead. I don't want a whole separate commit just for, okay, we took this code and we changed one line. That line should just be a part of this existing commit here. So we want to keep our commit history very clean. Not too many commits. 31 commits is overwhelming. I'll never be able to figure out where I made a specific change in 31 commits. But if I only have like one or two to choose from, it's usually a lot easier to figure out where that change got. Other cool things. If I have a pull request, you can assign yourself as an assignee. Assignees are the people that are responsible for seeing this pull request through to completion. Usually it's whoever wrote the code, but maybe like you fixed a bug, but you assign it to someone else because it's fixing code that they wrote and you want them to, follow this bug fix through. For the most part, you'll be assigning yourself. Some systems other than GitHub, like you just are the one who's assigned to this commit. There's not really any way around it. You should also definitely assign some reviewers. Reviewers are the specific person that you want to review your code. So it will send them an email to say, this pull request is open and ready for review. And anytime you make changes, it'll, send, or you respond to their comments, then it'll also send them email updates. This is super, super helpful for like, if you're working on a team with other people, they need to know that they need to review your code and have it be super visible. So definitely set these two. All this other stuff is sort of like project specific. But these two are musts for sure. All right, long rambling time over. Interactive time beginning. So I have this GitHub MR. What I would like you guys to do is to open this up in your browser. You can split screen if you want, or you can just open it in the browser and just listen in the background. But I would like us to go through individually. And if you find anything in here about this pull request or about this commit, or just anything that you think we could do better, either, drop it in the chat or feel free to unmute and speak up. And we'll go just as we see things, we'll sort of like pull up what you're talking about. So definitely like tell us what file, what line number, and we'll work through this together and see how we can improve all of this. This is going to be a little overwhelming, which is good. And I think this highlights one point in particular before we get too far. There is a lot happening in this pull request. Like so many files are being, changed, and we're having some stuff getting deleted and adding new icons. And this pull request tells me that it's supposed to be adding like features, like a product table and a search bar. So like, why am I updating my index.html to have better indentation? Or why am I adding like configuration files for this project? Or why am I adding a GitHub workflow? This is something that we did a couple weeks back where when we push our code to GitHub, it will automatically build it and then deploy it to a server to our GitHub pages. I would argue none of these things have anything to do with your product table and your search bar. And that's problematic because as the reviewer, I just sort of set you guys loose, and I'm setting myself loose too, to look at this code for the first time, and I have no idea what I need to look at. I could look at all of these things, but they're relatively unrelated. The other problem with this is these are all in one commit, and if I find a bug in the product table that is super critical to fix, like thinking in the future, any application we're writing at a company is going to be used by lots of people. And so you might release your code, and as it's running somewhere, then people find a bug later on. At that point, you need to spend some time fixing the bug, but if it's really critical, you can't just leave the bug sitting around for a while. If it's not super critical, then maybe you could do that. But depending on where you work, there will be many cases where a bug cannot sit for a little while. Like you gotta find some way to deal with it right away. So what we usually would do in that case is we would do a git revert, which if I have a thing here and I want to say, I want to undo this commit, I could copy the unique identifier of this commit and say git revert that specific identifier. Let's add all git commit dash dash amend first. So we fixed a bug in order to make our code actually work. And so I want that to be part of my pull request. And like we said earlier, that bug fix, it should just be part of the code that I'm going to release. It should all be one commit. We don't want to like release some code and then in a separate commit, fix the code that we just released. And so I'm just going to git commit dash dash amend, which says take these changes and just stick them in the previous commit. So now this is going to be part of our product table and search bar. If I do git log, we still have our two commits. We can push that up to our pull request, just so our pull request is up to date. And we said if I found a bug in this code, I could do git revert and then that hash, and it'll create a new commit with the name revert this old commit name, and then it also gives you the identifier. And so if I do this and I say, what is the difference between my current commit and 3 commits ago? Oops, doesn't quite work. But essentially, we've made some changes and then we immediately undid them. So the state of my application here is now equal to the state of my application here. So if we know that this was a good state and this introduced the bug, I'm going to revert the commit that made the bug and then go back through later and try and fix that code in a new commit. But if I revert this commit, if I had a problem with the product table, well, now I'm also undoing all of my work for the search bar, and I'm undoing all of my work to create this workflow and update these files to be correct. We're undoing a lot of things that are unrelated to our bug. And so it's really important that we want to usually have like one commit that is focused on a specific feature. Maybe you have like 2 commits that are on the same feature but are different parts of that feature and you split them up because it's too much code to review in one commit. That's also fine. Maybe these 17 files are all related to our feature, but I just want to do half in one commit and half in the other. That way I can review the first commit, which is only a couple of files, and then review the second commit, which is only a couple of files. And that's a little bit more manageable as a reviewer. But in this case, if we just have one commit, we're undoing everything, and that's bad. So we probably want to split this up. So we have one commit for our product table, one commit for our search bar, and maybe another commit for all of the other random stuff that we're updating here. I would say that this GitHub workflow and these configuration files and like swapping out the icon, these are completely unrelated changes to our product table and search bar. And I would honestly put them in a separate pull request. I would not put them in this pull request, even if they're in a separate commit. So let's do that first, and then we can jump back into this and find some actual code related issues. I'm going to git reset -- hard, one commit up from the head. And the reason why I'm going to do this is it's going to remove that revert commit that we made, because there's not actually a bug in here right now. But we want to split this commit up and make it a little bit better. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a git reset -- mixed head tilde. So what's the difference between these? Git reset says I want to move my Git history back to a previous commit. Head points at the end of your current branch, and then we could put a number after this tilde to say how many commits back. If we don't do it, then it assumes it's just the most recent commit. So git reset -- hard says completely get rid of the most recent commit. Don't keep any of the code, don't keep the message, it's gone. -- mixed says get rid of that commit, but keep all of the code. And so now, if we do this, it has like basically undone our commit. The commit doesn't exist anymore. We only have that initial commit. The one that we made doesn't exist. But all of the changes that were in that commit are still here, and they're now unchanged. So now we can go through and figure out, okay, what needs to go in the first commit, second commit, third commit, so on and so forth. So let's do that. I would say this .github, where our actions are going to go, let's make a commit first for just like the miscellaneous setup files. So maybe I want to add my workflow .github. This icon here, I don't think we like added anything important. So this icon stuff, we can add those icon changes. So I'm going to git add public /icon, and you'll see that these turn green. So anything green is going to be in my next commit. Anything in red is just changes that are still, sitting around waiting to be committed. This is the other half of that icon change. So we probably want to add this too. We deleted the old icon and we added a new one. This ESLint RC, this is a configuration file. So I'm going to add that. The README is just information about our project. It doesn't, have anything to do with the product table. So we can add that. The index.html, if we look at the change, I think all we did was just like change the indentation here a little bit, and we changed the icon. So this needs to get updated as well, along with the icon. All right, what else do we have? So we have changes to our app, this asset, which got deleted, so we can probably add this. Let's do it this way. Let's go into our VS Code and get some help. So VS Code has this really cool sources section over here, which can help you identify, okay, what changes have not been committed, which of them have I staged already, and which ones do I still need to stage? And it also shows you like what actually changed here. So this vite config, this is something we changed in relation to our our workflow. So I want to add this. We're going to stage this change. package lock and package.json. We changed some scripts around here for our GitHub pages. And so those also need to be added along with our workflow. So we'll stage those. The CSS here and our app.jsx. These are functional changes, which are related to our product table. The CSS, maybe we could do in a separate commit, but I think it's okay to leave since we're like working on a feature and adding some components that need their own CSS. So everything else here looks okay. This is all related to our product table and our search bar and, new things that we're adding. So I'm going to take all of these and I'm going to stage these individual changes. And we can change the commit message up here. Maybe we'll call this commit set up configuration files and updates tab icon. We want to keep our message very descriptive about exactly what's happening in this commit. We're changing our configuration files. We're updating the tab icon. And also we're adding GitHub pages workflow. You could even split these into smaller commits if you want to. I think in this case, because nothing functionally should be changing, it's okay to put them all together. We're gonna commit them. Now if I do git log, we see that we have this commit with just our upcoming changes. And I'm gonna test to make sure this works. I'm gonna do something a little crazy here. I don't know if you guys have done a git stash yet, but I want to test this commit and make sure that my code is in a functional state here and I'm not like missing anything that also needs to be staged. And so I'm going to get the rest of my changes, which if I run right now, these changes are also going to show up in my application. And I'm going to git add everything, which makes them green. And then I'm going to do git stash, which puts them in like a little box just for a little bit and sort of tucks them away. And we can get them back by doing git stash apply later on. We're not going to do that yet because we don't want them back. We want to not have these changes lying around and then test with just that commit. So if I npm run dev, it doesn't work. Our imports react.svg doesn't exist in app.jsx. So we got to go fix that. Vite.svg does not exist. React.svg does not exist. We removed those. And these pieces down here depended on them. So we're just going to take those out. We'll just add like a paragraph in here that just says to do. We haven't done anything here yet, but we will very soon. Cool. And let's double check and make sure our main.jsx is also okay. Sweet. And now it just shows to do. We have our basic application. We set everything up and now we're ready to actually develop some features. All right. I'm going to take this and I'm going to amend my commit because again, we're fixing a bug. It belongs as part of this commit in order to make this commit functional. And so we're going to get commit -- amend, which puts that change into our commits. We still just have the two commits. And now I know this works. And so I'm ready to git stash apply to get my changes back for my product table and my search bar and so on and so forth. All right, and then I would say even beyond this, we should split our search bar and our product table into separate commits because they are two different features. Again, if I find a bug in my search bar, I don't want to have to undo my product table and vice versa. So let's see if we can do that. We might be able to make this work. Let's look at these changes and see what the difference is. This app.jsx, when I applied my stash, it found that these, like what was in the stash is in conflict with what was from the previous commit. I want to keep what's in my stash because I know that this is my good code. And so I'm just going to say, it says this is a current change. I want to keep the stuff that's coming in from the stash, the incoming change. This is dealing with merge conflicts. You don't really have to do that when you're working on your own project, but once you start working with other people, it'll be really important. All right. So let's get add all. Now that our merge changes are dealt with and we can see all those changes we made. For the sake of time, I'm not going to split these commits, just because I want to talk about more interesting stuff and get you guys involved. So we're just going to git commit, add table of products, add search bar to filter products. And now if I get log, I have those two commits I just made. My pull request doesn't show those yet. My pull request still shows that I have the one commit with 17 changes. And so I need to overwrite what GitHub thinks this branch looks like with the stuff that I just did. I know that these commits I made that I cleaned up are what should be in the pull request. And so I'm going to force push it, which says overwrite whatever's there. And now we have our two commits. There's still 17 files changed, but we can at least split this into separate commits and say, okay, well, I'm going to look at this setup commit first, where, the amount of files that's changing is a lot smaller. And maybe I think this is fine. And then separately, I can go into my second commit and look at those changes, which is only to the, actual functional stuff. All right. Following so far, questions, concerns, anything you're curious about? Anything I went way too fast through?
I just think as far as like our knowledge in the course and what they've given us so far, it's been like when you do the commit, you do the -m for message, and then mostly it's like git add all and then just add your message at the end. The interface that you're using is without the this is called something. What is this called? This
This is
little
called Vim.
yeah,
And
I don't think any of us have really been taught how to use Vim.
yes, that is perfectly acceptable. It is not something that I even touched once, except on occasion because Git forces you to use it. And now that I am like working full time, I use Vim every single day. It's a way that you can edit files through your terminal without opening up Visual Studio. So like Visual Studio has its own way to like write commit messages up here. But if I have a change, I can either, like you guys have done so far, I add my change so that it's being tracked, and then I commit it, and I use -m to say, I'm going to give you a commit message in line here, which doesn't open that crazy interface, and I could say add new file. Or what I do more frequently at work is I do git commit without the -m and without specifying a message. And this is Vim. Vim is a little bit complicated because you have to like know certain commands in order to be able to use it. Which like if you ever get stuck in this interface and you don't know what to do, just Google like how do I get out of Vim, and there'll be questions. Or if you have access to ChatGPT, that can also help you a lot. But here, this is like a text file that is then going to become the commit message. And so that's why we're editing it here. And I can click the I key, which is a command to start inserting new text into this file. And so now I can write whatever I want. And I hit escape to get out of this insert mode. And now I'm back into command mode. And so I can hit a command like DD, where I click D 2 times in a row, and it gets rid of the whole line. Or I can hit O, which jumps to a new line and creates a line break and stuff like that. There's lots of really cool commands. But when you're writing much more sophisticated commit messages rather than like added search bar, having this interface can be helpful because now you can work on multiple lines. My work enforces that you have a header and a body for your commit. So the header is like a one-sentence summary of what's actually changing. So in this commit, add search bar and product table. And then the body is like, why are we doing this? Like, what is the reasoning? Were there any things that you had to consider? Are there any potential ramifications of doing this? just sort of like adding color commentary. So here we might say, right now, our app doesn't have any way to view our product data. Let's create a new table to show all of our products, top to bottom. Let's also add a search bar so that we can filter the table for only products we are interested in. This is about the length of a commit message that I write every day. It's just the requirement, and having this information is really helpful to other people working on your team about like what is in this commit, why does it exist, and if someone comes across an issue in the future or is curious why a piece of code works, they can go to your commit message for the commit that introduced that code and understand like why you did it. But this requires going through Vim to do it. And if I'm editing here, I can type anything I want in insert mode, and then I hit escape, which goes into command mode, and I do :WQ exclamation point, which will save whatever changes I've made. And now this is my big commit message up here. Getting familiar with Vim will be helpful. Another thing that happens fairly often is like I'm working on someone else's system. So I'm creating what's called an SSH connection, which like securely connects me to another computer, and I can, do stuff on that computer if I want to. But if I'm doing an SSH connection, I don't have access to VS Code to open a file. And so if I'm doing that, I probably need to say Vim open my temp.txt, and now I can use the same interface to type some new text, other new text, so on, so on, and save this and do it.
Something you have like added to your terminal to make it look like that?
All
Like,
these
really-
colors,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
This is a setup that I found on the internet for this program called iTerm2, which is, I think, just like a more powerful version of the Mac terminal. Basically, any terminal you have on any device can be customized to your heart's content. But if you're on Mac, would highly recommend iTerm2, and you can play around with some colors. There'll be people that just like have a guide to, get your terminal bootstrapped and looking pretty. And if you think that it looks good at the end, then you can roll with it. I would not say this is super common. A lot of people have just like very basic terminals. I think this one has some downsides in that like this section over here is really long and this is really long. So the area where I'm actually like typing my command is very small in comparison. And so it's going to very frequently go onto a new line or, do some annoying stuff like that. Whereas if this was a little bit less verbose or less flowery, then, my commands wouldn't wrap as much. So up to personal preference. I don't remember if I have a link to like this specific setup, but if I can find it, I'll link it in the agenda.
No, just thanks for clarifying that, because I was getting confused whether this was the Vim or not, because I wasn't used to seeing the like flags, but yeah.
Yep.
Your
Vim
terminal.
will look like this in any terminal unless you also customize Vim, which you can do if you want to. I personally don't. All right. Let's jump back into things unless there's other questions, in which case throw them out now. I'm gonna undo this file that we just created. And our pull request looks good. All right, so I'm gonna go back to this pull request and I'm gonna open up my commits tab. I'm gonna look at this first commit. Initially, I would probably separate these into two different PRs, but that requires me to have a separate branch, and I don't really want to do that right now. So I would look first at this first commit, and I'm going to look through and try and see if there's any code in here that looks sort of messy or problematic, or something that we could do that's a little bit better. In this case, it's just like formatting files and adding some configuration files. And so there's no actual code being written here. So I would probably not spend very long on this code review. I might see, ooh, it's doing a lot of formatting. You know, is this formatting because this person has a different formatter than everyone else? In which case they need to fix it? Or do they have a formatter and the project doesn't have a standard formatter? And so like my VS Code is changing the tab indentation size, and then his is changing them back, in which case we got to figure that out. But there's not a whole lot to review here in terms of code, so I'm going to mostly skip over this. And let's look at the second commit. So I have it open. Feel free to keep this open. I'm going to go into my commits, and now I'm going to say changes in this second commit down here. Add table of products, add search bar to filter. Or if you want to go back and show them all at the same time, you can. But we're just going to look at the product table and search bar changes. All right. I kind of like I got sidetracked on a tangent. But I had asked very briefly if anyone had wanted to like go through here and pick out something that you think we could do better or something that you think is problematic. Did anyone have a chance to like look through here and found anything that they want to talk about? No right or wrong answers.
I think you touched on it just now, but like in terms of the formatting, the spacing, is there like a best practice in terms of how much indentation? Because looking at around like line 16 where there's like such a big gap, does that become problematic like in terms of reading or
It's totally up to your team preference, how you want to do formatting. JavaScript, like there's no built-in formatter. In some languages, like the language I use at work, Go, comes with its own formatter, and so you don't really get to choose the rules. But in
oh,
JavaScript,
okay.
my, prettier formatter, which is what I've been using so far, I can configure this to my heart's content. I think I have it set to do 4 spaces or like indent using tabs, but the width of a tab is 4 spaces. And I could change this at any time if I want to. I could go into settings and go into tab width. It says tab, prettier tab width down here. I could do 2 and save that. And then now if I hit save, oh, this is showing me a git diff. Oh no, it's not doing it. Anyway, there's no standard in particular
Okay.
on tab width. I use 4, some people use 2. I think 2 oftentimes doesn't give enough like difference. I would prefer to be able to look at this and see, okay, if I put my cursor here and then I scroll down, I can find where the ending curly brace is or the ending parenthesis. If it's like 2 spaces, then sometimes I think it's really hard to like keep track of where that line is. Just personal preference.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
I'll point something out here while you guys are still looking through. Um, I'm just going to go top to bottom here since that's usually how I would look at things. I might have questions about something I'm looking at and then sort of jump out of order to go like investigate like, ooh, what is this search bar? Maybe I go into the search bar component and try and figure out what code is in there. But first thing that jumps out to me here, this, CSS is fine. We don't need this anymore for a component, whatever. But I see a comment here that says search bar state. I personally think that if we have a piece of state that is your search bar, this comment is completely unnecessary. It's not telling us any new information. It's not like giving us any clarity as to why we need this state. I think we don't need this comment at all. I think it's totally superfluous. So I would probably leave comment and say, this comment is unnecessary. Please. I've been told a lot of things in my life about comments, but I think the theory that I subscribe to at this current moment is we should add comments if we have a function that we need to describe like what it does because it's not perfectly clear, or there's like a really specific reason why we did something the way we did. And then I would maybe like put a comment on top of that function that says this function does X because Y, if you're trying to accomplish Z, then, pass it this certain value. Things like that are just useful to someone who's going to call that function, another user who's going to write code. Or I would use a comment if I'm like writing some code that I know works, but the reason why it works is unclear. So like if I have a function here, and let's say I have like a for loop in here, I have some data in an array, which, has some strings. And I like did some really crazy thing here where I looped from the second item until the end, and I skipped that first item entirely. So if I'm doing some weird stuff here, this is telling me it's not used. Gotta do that. Like, why are we starting at 1 here? This is not clear to me. Maybe I've like done some research and I found out that this is like, I have to skip the first item, or I'm like doing this really complicated implementation of something and I couldn't find a better way to do it. I might leave a comment here that says start at index 1 so that the first item doesn't get processed unexpectedly. Again, this is gibberish. This doesn't mean anything to us. But if this were providing some clarity as to why I did something the way I did, that is not like immediately clear just looking at it for the first time, then maybe I would leave a comment in there. But definitely like fewer comments is better, except where necessary. I don't want to like have to sort through all of your code and have a comment on every single line, especially if it's really clear already what this thing does. So like this search bar here, I know this is state for a search bar. I can just get rid of this comment. It's not necessary. While we're here, the other thing, bar, I would probably change the name of this. Bar is not clear, like what kind of bar? Is it like an alcoholic bar? Is it like a bar, like when you have like a page break and it's just like a flat line across the page? Or like, what is the bar? I should make this clear that this is the contents of my search bar. So I would leave a comment here and say, let's rename this to be more clear of the function. Maybe call this search bar contents or just search bar. This is also something that happens every day. Naming things is really hard. And so I might come up with a name and think that it's okay, but then someone else on my team disagrees and says, well, I think we should call it this instead. And they're probably right. All right. Those are the 2 things up here. There's plenty more in this pull request. Anyone else see anything that they would like to change? Or even just something here at the rest of this file? I'd say there's maybe a couple things I would change here. How about banking off of the discussion we just had about comments? This is code down here that's not being used. It doesn't need to be there. I might have commented this code out as I was testing something earlier. Probably what happened, just piecing this together, given that this says to do, like this was a work in progress as I was developing these features. And now that it's finished, I have, something actually passed into that make search function. But this code is not doing anything anymore. And so I should definitely get rid of this. Code that's commented out should never be a part of your pull request. It should just not be there. Other things. Anyone see anything here that looks a little weird or could be improved? All right. Other things I would probably change here, this X and Y is very poor naming. So these are properties that I'm passing into my product table. And to property X, I'm passing in like some product data that is, just a dummy hard-coded copy, which I find over here, my dummy data. And then we're passing it to a property called X. I have no idea what X is. If someone opens the product table, page and then sees, oh, in my product table, I accept properties X and Y, like what the hell is that? Is it a string? Is it a number? What does it represent? So we got to fix this naming convention here. Let's make these property names reflect what the data is. Maybe X can be product data, since that's what we're passing in. Up here, we're passing in our data of like all the different products we have. And then Y, what are we doing with Y? Ooh, this looks really gross. We'll talk about that in a second. All right, well, what even is it? We're passing in bar. So this is our search bar state, which we said we're going to rename up here. But this is whatever the contents of my search bar is right now. So where does Y get used? Y gets used right here to filter down based on, does the product name contain whatever's in the search bar? So maybe we call Y like filter, name filter, or name must contain, or something that describes, okay, I'm going to use this to filter out my products based on the name. Cool. We have our data here, we filter it. We take everything and make it lowercase, and then we compare it with the search bar. The reason why we do two lowercase here is to make sure that we're doing a fair comparison. So if my product has a capital in it, but my search bar doesn't, then I want to ignore case. And so usually what we'll do is we'll turn both of them to lowercase, but we're not doing that here. Here we're only taking our product name and making it lowercase, but the search content is not made lowercase. So if my search bar has suitcase in all caps, my product name is going to be set to lowercase, which is going to be all lowercase, and then index of is not going to work because capital suitcase does not appear in lowercase suitcase. And we can actually see that here. If I do suitcase, nothing shows up. But if I do suitcase, then everything shows up. So this filtering is not working as expected. This is something that me or whoever wrote, probably missed accidentally. So we'll leave a comment here because I think that this is something that should be improved, or something that, the writer didn't think about. We also need to convert the filter criteria to lowercase for a fair comparison. I'd leave that as a comment as well. All we're doing here is leaving lots of comments. And once we leave all of our comments, we can hit the button to say, yes, your code is good, I approve it. Or I think there's a lot of stuff that needs to be improved, not approved yet, make these changes and get back to me. So I can, comment and leave a overall comment that says some things need to get changed first before we can merge this. And then I would, go down here and hit approve or request changes. I don't know why it's not letting me do that right now. Maybe it's because I'm not a reviewer. But in general, like if we say it's all good, we'll hit approve. And if we say it's bad, we'll request changes. All right, there's more stuff in here that I would probably go through and change. We'll do like a quick speed run in like 2 minutes. One thing that I would change here about this code is in my product table. This is really deeply nested. I think Tori pointed out earlier that, like, you know, if we have lots of levels of indentation to get to these tags, well, maybe I'm putting too much inside of this component. Maybe I should extract some of this out. So this is a product table, and we have our table and our table body, and then we like have all of these products, and we also render the product inside of here and all the stuff that goes with it. I would probably advocate for taking all this product stuff out and making a product item and product equal product. And then we could create a separate component over here called product. JSX, function, product, product. We'll return all of this stuff. So this should work exactly the same, but now this is a lot easier to keep track of. Product. Let's call this product item, just to be consistent. I'm gonna change it down here. All right, and then I need to add a key here, which is product.id. All right, and so this is a lot more manageable. So now we have only our elements related to the table, and then everything about the item itself is reusable and is in a separate file. And so this is much less overwhelming from like a UI perspective. If it's really deeply nested, even like regular code, if we have like 4 or 5 levels of indentation, maybe we should try and find a way to cut some of that out and, you know, pull some code away and put it in a different function, which I think is something I was going to talk about here. Like this on search submit function is really complicated, and it has like 3 levels of indentation that it probably doesn't need. So we could rewrite this function and sort of move some code around, or maybe extract something into a different function and try and make it better. That would be another thing that I would definitely leave a comment on. All right, I don't want to hold you guys any longer. We're already like 5 minutes over. Thanks for bearing with me. This was just a lot of talking at you guys. I hope it was useful in some way. I'm around for questions. If you have questions, feel free to stay on. Otherwise, make sure you sign in using the sign in form on the agenda, and I'll catch you guys next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for today.
Have a good weekend.